All right, this is the review for exam 2 for Plants and Society. Remember, for exams, you want to plan your study time. You want to review the things to go over and then practice. Okay, and the more time you spend practicing, the probably the better the grade you're going to get. So plan, study in short, frequent blocks, take breaks over time, choose active study methods to study the textbook, lecture notes, to make review sheets and flashcards, or with partners. These are all things that can help you. So, chapter 4 was on the tissues. A tissue is simply a group of cells, usually having some similar structures and being part of a structure and functioning together. Among the tissues, the most important tissues were the meristems, the apical and lateral meristems, the cork cambium and the vascular cambium. Meristem simply means growth areas, and these growth areas are areas where there's lots of mitosis. And then around these areas, cells mature and change. In plants, we see two basic types of tissues: simple tissues, which are where we have just one type of cell, like making up the pith, maybe a parenchyma cell, or complex tissues that use several different types of cells to form structures, like xylem, epidermis, phloem. Those are all complex tissues. Okay, here's meristems. These are apical meristem is a primary growth area, and it produces primary tissues. Right, coming out of it, those primary tissues, the protoderm, ground meristem, and procambium, those will become the epidermis, the pith, and then the vascular tissues, xylem and phloem. Simple tissues you can see here: parenchyma, collenchyma, and sclerenchyma. The sclerenchyma are often dead when you see them. They're lignin cells that are supportive, lots of fibers in them. But parenchyma and collenchyma, these are live cells. Parenchyma are often the cells you find doing photosynthesis. Complex tissues, as I mentioned before: xylem, epidermis, periderm. That's the woody plants. These have several cell types, like you see in the epidermis. You see the regular cells, you see cells that form trichomes, you see the guard cells, things like that. Xylem and phloem. Xylem is water conducting tissue. Phloem contains tissue that conducts nutrients, sugars, things like that. These are often close to one another. They are different types of cells, different types of things in there. They're important. We talk about them a lot. Okay, the next chapter is on roots. Roots function to anchor the plant, absorb water, nutrients. They have areas of growth. Some form storage. The root forms right from the seed, the radical, and we generally see two types: tap roots and fibrous or adventitious. And in some cases, these can become woody. Root structure at the very tip of the root is the root cap, protecting the apical meristem, the area of growth. Then you have the region of elongation and root hairs coming off of that. There's a region of maturation as well. You'll have xylem and phloem in this stuff. One of the things that's really important is these root hairs. These are small projections from the root that function in absorption, and they're aided by fungal organisms that associate with plant roots and pass water and other nutrients to plants in return for sugars. There are a bunch of specialized roots for food storage, starch, things like that. Some roots store water. Some roots are reproductive or propagative. Some get air. Lots of different types of roots. We don't really go too much into it, but there's lots of different minor physiological functions important for those plants. For stems, again, stems have nodes and internodes. Nodes are where leaves and buds come off. The leaves have a petiole and a blade. The farthest, the terminal or apical bud, is where the apical meristem is. That's the one right at the tip. That's going to give rise to those primary tissues and then later on secondary tissues. In stems, you sometimes have secondary tissues, and these arise from a vascular cambium. That's a layer of meristem that lies between phloem and xylem, and it will produce new phloem and new xylem annually. And so this is where you get annual rings in these long-lived plants. And just outside of this, you have a cork cambium, another kind of growth area, secondary meristem, that um, is going to produce cork cells. This is going to produce the bark. And so we see it that way. Stems are important structures containing these meristems. Vascular tissues develop from the stem, gives rise to the leaves. The epidermis stem structures vary. Among the most important variances are the stems that produce wood. These are concentric layers of secondary tissue. Wood is mostly secondary xylem that you find in broadleaf trees and to some extent conifer trees as well. When we look at wood, there is a central area of heartwood, which is dead xylem that's no longer conductive. Often it's compressed because the cells kind of compact, and that's surrounded by secondary xylem, which is the sapwood, which has live cells that are conducting water. Then you'll have the vascular cambium, then the phloem, then the cork cambium, and the bark. Okay. Annual rings show 1 year's growth of xylem. Thick rings happen in years with lots of precipitation. Small rings when it's drier. In addition to the rings, there's also lateral conduction through rays. These are secondary xylem that will contain tracheids and vessel fibers that will allow water to move from inner areas to outer areas. The cone-bearing trees also contain wood that's secondary xylem, but here the softwoods will contain tracheids and resin canals and be missing some of the fibers and vesicles. They'll still have ray elements. They'll still have those other things. Here, okay, sapwood, heartwood shows the differences in there. Heartwood, non-functional, darker, heavier, may rot, doesn't really hurt the tree. Whoops, I got a couple old slides in there. Let's go to leaves. Leaves are going to contain some parenchyma and collenchyma. They contain vascular bundles with xylem and phloem. The mesophyll is the area where we see the lots of chloroplasts and where photosynthesis occurs. The palisade parenchyma or palisade mesophyll is where most photosynthesis happens. The spongy mesophyll contains airspace from air that's entered via the stoma. The stomas are opening in the lower epidermis. There may be some in the upper epidermis. It depends on the plants. Specialized leaves. One of the most common specializations is for dry areas. So arid areas will have leaves that might have fewer stomata. They might be sunken in pits. The leaves might have a waxy coating and increased thickness. They may store quite a bit of water. Sometimes they're hairy to limit sun exposure. They can be oriented in different ways. Needles are actually a leaf that's been modified so that it can reduce water loss. So here you see the sunken stoma that reduce airspace in there. A thick waxy cuticle on there, all are adaptations for limiting water loss. Aquatic plants have reduced xylem, stoma on the upper surface. Insect trapping plants have some sort of mechanism to trap and digest insects to get extra nutrients. Lots of other specialized leaves, reproductive, flower pot leaves, all sorts of things. So leaves contain distinct structure, cuticle, epidermis, stomata with guard cells. It says hard cells, it should be guard cells. And then the mesophyll where photosynthesis occurs. There's lots of specialized leaves. Okay. Humans use leaves as food. There's lots of different species of leaves. Generally, leaves are unsafe to eat, but we've selected them to have fewer toxins, and they're good sources of fiber, vitamins, and minerals. I talked about tobacco. It's a plant that has compounds to deter insects, but those compounds are active stimulants that can be used by people. And so we select and harvest tobacco. I talked about coca. That's Europe, or excuse me, a South American shrub, been cultivated for thousands of years because it contains an alkaloid stimulant, cocaine. Generally, the people chewed the leaves for thousands of years, very mild stimulant, but concentrated cocaine is much more has much greater potential for harm and abuse. I also mentioned hemp, cannabis, a very fast-growing herbaceous plant, very good source of fibers. It can be used as a source of food and cooking oil, and it also produces a psychoactive drug, THC and CBDs, other accessory drugs. So I'll stop there. These are just slides from our PowerPoint presentation.